Hi, everybody. Welcome. We are going to get ourselves started here for our last in our series of webinars. For those of you who have been invited to submit final applications to CLEAR's Digitizing Hidden Special Collections and Archives. We're so glad that you could be here with us today as we spend some time answering all of your questions. To start off, we just have a couple of slides here, and we want to begin with some reminders about using Zoom. We do have a live transcript being generated today that you can turn on if you'd like to. To turn this on, click the CC Live Transcript option at the bottom of your Zoom window. As with our previous sessions, we're in a regular Zoom meeting space instead of the webinar space. So you have control over your own microphones. Be mindful of this as you interact with us today and ensure that you're muted if you aren't speaking. You are welcome. We'll have time for you to ask questions live through your microphones, or you're also welcome to use the chat to type your questions in. To open the chat box, you can hover your mouse towards the bottom of the screen and open it manually. The chat does default to send a message to everyone, but you can also message individuals directly if you need to. We will do our very best to keep track of the questions that are being posted. If we don't have time today to get to all of the questions, we will write up responses to the remaining ones and post all of the answers within the next few days in the session transcript. As a reminder, this session is being recorded. And I did just see that question pop up, and we will post it alongside all of the other webinars on our Apply for an Award page, likely by the end of the week.
Okay, I'm Sharon Burney. I'm joined today by my fellow program officers, Joy Banks and Becca Kwan, and we'll be answering all of your questions during our time together. We're supported today by our colleagues, Allison Pope and Diane Ramirez. And we also want to thank the team from AI Media for their assistance with live transcription today. Before we get started, we did want to go ahead and share the survey link for today's session. We invite you to go ahead and open that now so you remember to complete it at the end.
We've been working to add some samples of some of the required uploads to our website over the past couple weeks. So we just wanted to make a note to all of you that those resources are now available. There are 2 to 3 lists of collections, representative samples, and budget details that each sort of provide a different look at the way successful applicants have structured those documents, because there are some different ways to approach them. So that's really all we wanted to share here at the start. We're glad to talk through some of these questions that we see coming in. And you can also feel free to hop in using your mic. We know these questions are going to be a little more complicated as y'all are getting into your project design and really digging into the application. So we really just want to know how it's going and what problems or questions you're encountering. So I'll stop sharing my slides and we can get started.
Our first question that we had come in was, when will winning grants be notified?
I'll start with that one. We hope to have the announcements for the winning grants by around the end of March, hopefully beginning of April.
Yeah, that's right. And then the public announcement is when folks can actually start hiring and announcing themselves, and that usually takes place by April 1st.
But if you are awarded funds, you'll find out much earlier than that, because there is a little bit more work to do after notifications are made as we work to execute the IP agreements together. So probably sometime in February is when we expect a private announcement.
And we do, and you, if you should be awarded, you won't be able to make it public until we make the public announcement.
There was a question just above that one that asks for the checkboxes associated with rights. One of the boxes says applicant plans to impose specific attributions requirements when digital copies created through the project are reused by others. If we're planning to include a blanket statement asking people to cite our organization as the source of the materials, should I check that box? Joy, do you want to start us off with that one?
Yeah, that is a great question. And it's one that we've been answering. This is a new way that we are collecting this information. And something like that, you would want to check that box, and then you would explain in your rights, ethics, and reuse statement that you would explain that you are wanting them to use a particular way to cite your organization. So there's a connection between whatever you're indicating in those summary statements and then in the actual plan or policy that you're putting together for access and reuse of the materials.
The next one I'm seeing is we'd like to hire graduate student researchers to help with the work. The university has a cap on what these students can be paid, about $24 to $27 per hour. Is it okay to include this type of part-time work in the budget? Yeah, and we often see that student workers are hired, undergrads, graduates, through these programs or through these projects. And I think explaining that, you know, the reasons that you have the budgeted hourly wage that you do is really great. Explaining how they're going to be helping and, you know, what the benefit is going to be to them as they work on the collections and learn about the collections. That is a really great component to include. And a lot of times we also love seeing that, you know, if there are any research components or any types of outputs that they're doing, that you can include those in your reporting once a grant is received, and we love to see those and help boost those.
I think that's it. Anybody else want to add anything to that other than maybe including the FTE that they're working at? The next question is, will the recording of session, will a recording of this session be posted? And as usual, we always include a recording of our workshops and our webinars online. It'll be on our page on our Digitizing Collections Apply for an Award page. It will also include a transcript of this, the recording, and the question and answer document, so you can refer to that for other questions that you might have that might be related to the work that you're doing as it goes along.
Yeah, the next one I'm seeing from Anne says, we plan to hire an external consultant to install, troubleshoot, and train project/organizational staff on its use. Do we need to provide a price quote for the actual consultant as part of our proposal? We have an estimated amount that our IT staff gave us, but we do not yet have the actual consultant identified yet.
That is an interesting question. We had placed in the handbook for this year that if you expect to use a vendor or subcontractor and that it was going to be more than $5,000, that we were requiring quotes for that. This sort of work is a little bit different than that, as it's more like a project-based consulting work for some of this. What we would probably recommend so that you can still fill the requirements of the application is to provide some sort of justification for the amount that you are requesting, perhaps based on past products or past projects. Maybe your IT department, if they can give you something that provides the estimation of this cost. The reviewers will really be looking for that justification for the amount that you're asking for, so that you're not underselling or overselling your request. And it's just that justification element. This is one of those things that we're asking a bit differently this year. And so this sort of feedback that we're getting on how this functions in real life has been very useful to us as we think ahead to the next iteration of the program. And so the next one I'm seeing too is about staffing as well. We plan to add an FTE staff role in our budget. Do we need to have a draft job description for this position? Is there an example of a job description for full-time staff person that can be shared? So yes, if you are having a staff member covered by award funds, we do ask that you provide a job description. It sort of balances out in that capacity question when you're either providing a resume for an existing staff person who's going to be working on it, or you're providing a job description to explain the type of roles and responsibilities that a new hire would take on. So you should provide those in the resumes or job description upload section. We do not have an example of a job description, but we could maybe find some. I mean, it sort of depends on what the nature of your work. We would probably do a general internet search and sort of point you to things that we thought were useful. Becca, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, I think we could probably plan to do that because it does seem like it would be helpful, and I can think of a few positions off the top of my head that might be a good fit. So yeah, Olivia, we can plan to share some examples that we've seen from past projects. I'm writing that on a sticky note for myself.
Yeah, we're all making notes of that.
I think we jumped around a little bit. So the next one that I see is, thank you for those examples. And do you have a budget narrative example? And I also have questions about the IP agreement. Who writes that? If we are modifying, do we write that? And it seems in the template that Clear is the writer. So for the first part of that question, that answer to your question is, I know we have a template for the budget detail. The budget narrative is in writing form, where you just give us a paragraph or two to explain to us what you plan on spending the money. This is where you can give more detail verbally about what you're going to use your money for, how you're going to use it, what you're going to use it for. For example, previously we were just talking about, I want to hire 3 students to do X, Y, and Z at this FTE, this amount of hours they'll spend. We want to utilize monies for all of the different details. So this is where you, in a narrative form, that you tell us what you're going to do, and the budget detail is where you put all the details of every budget line into it. So we don't have a template for that, because that's going to be contingent upon everybody's needs are going to be different based on what they're asking for and their needs. But we want your needs to, this is your justification of your needs and what those needs are in a narrative form. As far as the IP agreement, I'm going to turn that over to Joy or Becca to give more detail on our lawyer who assists us with writing that with your institute organization.
And just to clarify, we have provided a template for the budget narrative. It's an optional template that you can use that sort of helps you structure what Sharon was describing there, where you'll take your budget detail, which is the Excel spreadsheet, line by line items, and then you'll take that and move it to the budget narrative and describe and explain and justify each of your budget line items. We've changed the narrative a bit, and that's why we didn't provide the sort of modified examples that we've done with some of the others. But we'll take a look and see if there's maybe something that we can pull out of a past sample proposal that would be useful to this. We don't want to lead you astray given the changes to the program. With the IP.
It's Melissa here, sorry. I'm the one who asked the question.
Okay.
The explanation that Sharon gave and that kind of verbal example, I think is fine.
Okay.
I know budget narratives are kind of a new thing, so I was just wondering if there was a sample. The template will be fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
The IP agreement, we have provided the model IP agreements. There are two in that same section with all of our sample documents. There's a version for single organization projects and one for multi-organization projects. And we do encourage you to look at them. The language in them is pretty well set. That is language that's been negotiated between CLEAR and the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, who has granted us the parent award for this. There are a few sections in it that are able to be adjusted. And usually that negotiation happens after the recommendations for funding are made. But if you see something in there that's going to be extremely problematic and you would like to question that, we can work alongside our lawyer to see if it's something that is actually flexible or if it's something that is not.
Joy, it's Melissa again.
Yes.
So we have sent it off to I'm working with the First Nations in British Columbia, and we have sent it off to the lawyer, and the two partner organizations have sent it off to their people as well. But I need to clarify, that does not need to be in place for the November 19th deadline.
No.
Okay, good.
Yeah, no, we don't. It's great that you've sent it off already, because we know that, especially when working with tribal governments, the process can take more time. So it's great that you've already sort of touched base and have shared that with them. If you get nominated for funding, that's why we work as quickly as possible to notify folks of the recommendations after their review panel meeting, so that we have as much time as possible to work through the IP signature process, which has a lot of moving parts and we recognize can be complex. But you don't have to sign it before you submit your application. Gosh, no.
Thank you. That was kind of what I was hoping.
We've tried to take off as much from the application process as possible. And that's one of the things that happens after funding recommendations are made. Okay. So the next one that I'm seeing in the chat is, do you have sample work plans? While we're talking about sample documents from previous grant cycles, this was very helpful to me when applying for the Reportings at Risk grant, and I don't see sample work plans on the list of resources shared. No, this is a wholly new way of asking for work plans in the Hidden Collections program. So we don't have a sample because you are the first people who will write them. We did work to provide a template, which we hope will provide some guidance on the process. Our advice is always to provide as much detail and specificity on the work plan as possible. Our reviewers will be looking for specifics on the hardware that you will be using as you can give it. They will be looking for how you're describing things, what sort of cataloging or metadata description standards you're using, the specific digital preservation tools and guides that you'll apply for long-term preservation. And so our advice to you is to cram in as much as possible. And we've been recommending to folks who have asked us that if you have any sort of external guides, like if you have a very detailed digitization process guide, you might want to link out to that so that reviewers can reference it and you're not having to sort of put all of that work that you've already done into this work plan. You can say, we're going to apply our existing digitization policy, and here's the link to that policy. So that's some of our advice to you. We're hopeful that the way that we've structured this document actually combined 3 different application points. We're going to see how it goes. I don't know if Becca or Sharon had any more advice to add to that.
No, I think as detailed as possible is great guidance.
I don't know if we're going out of order or not. I'm going by the document. Do you have any guidelines or suggestions for photos of sample materials? I'm providing photos of AV materials in lieu of samples, as no part of the collections elected for digitization has been previously digitized. That's a good question. And sometimes we understand that this may be an issue for some people. And so in those instances, we need to take, we would suggest that you take photos of the actual documents. Sometimes they're in the boxes, sometimes they're reels, sometimes they may, whatever you can give us to show us what these collections look like in its rarest form right now. In the documents, the sample documents, we are asking you for the name of the holding organization, the collection title, any identification numbers or shelf marks that you can give us, any information about the restrictions or access and or reuse, and a brief contextual information about the actual collections. So in this instance, if it's reel-to-reels, or if it's CDs, you can show us a picture of the boxes, show what they look like, how many, as much information as you can give us without having the actual photos, I believe will be useful. And if any of my colleagues want to add to that.
Yeah, the link that Joy just posted in the chat to the new sample that we've posted from the University of Florida is a good example. They show their pictures of carriers and stuff.
Yeah, and trying to combine, so there's three sample representative samples, that's so redundant, we posted online, and I tried to find ones that sort of mix together different ways that you might do this. So one is manuscripts and images of the actual manuscripts with description overlaid. One is like screenshots from videos that were done, and it just has sort of an overarching description of what they're hoping to include. And then the example that I dropped in the chat has like that it was a microfilm digitization project. So they have pictures of their microfilm cabinets and the boxes, and then some sample digitization from it. But I hope those help illustrate that there's a lot of flexibility in that and how you represent these projects to the review panel. Okay, so next up, I am seeing on in-house digitization costs, our grant would pay for the equipment and staff to do the digitization work. So we have those costs listed in our grant. Do we need to also specifically include a calculated cost for digitization and metadata creation? So in thinking about that, I mean, you're responsible for justifying what you are asking the grant to fund. So you would need to explain those costs, why, like, you know, the equipment costs, the staffing costs. Metadata creation is a responsibility. If you are awarded funds, you need to make the materials accessible in some way. And so if that work is being done as a cost share from your organization, as opposed to, like, if there's a different staffing pool for people who would be doing digitization work, and then there's another pool of individuals who would be doing the metadata, I would recommend describing that as a cost share and explaining sort of the percentage of time that they would be providing to the project. I am looking at our handbook right now, so I don't give you a wrong response, but let's see, in-house digitization costs. I think explaining, you know, here's the cost for equipment, here's what we're anticipating for the digitization staff, and then explaining how you're going to cover the metadata is in that budget narrative section. That would explain how you arrived at your cost for digitization. It's trying to help equalize projects who are doing in-house digitization and give sort of an equivalent explanation of the level of time and investment as proposals that are going to include vendor proposals where, you know, they say very specifically, here are all the services that we're offering and this is what it's going to cost. So this is that, think of it sort of as your own explanation of why in-house digitization is the right plan for your project, and don't make it more complicated. Just explain what you're including in your calculations.
This is Anne. That was my question. Thank you, Joy. That's clear.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next up, is it possible for the proceeds of the grant to be applied to existing staff who would work on the project? This would be reflected in the personnel section of the budget of the grant as a percentage of staff time for existing full-time staff. A related question, does every person involved in the project, from volunteers to consultants paid less than $5,000, require job descriptions? Okay, well, we can start with the first part of this question. It's sort of related to the last one, actually, where folks would be using, you know, in-house staff to conduct the digitization work. So yeah, that is a way that the funds can be used. And I think reflecting it in the personnel section as a percentage of staff time is the perfect way to do that. So if you have any related questions about that, Terrence, feel free to hop in. And a related,
yeah, just that I was at the last webinar and it was about the whole area of creating jobs or creating new roles. That's all. That's why I prompted that.
yeah, that is
Thank you.
that was you know, Stacy's focus, but the other option is totally fine too.
And I think just a
Thank you.
reminder, in our handbook, we have the recommendation that if you are covering existing staff, do be sure to explain how it is that their regular responsibilities will be assimilated by other staff within your organization.
And then to the second part, does every person involved have to have a job description? No, I think, let me jump to the guidance that we give. So we only ask for a job description for key project staff, so whoever that may be in the context of your project, or for new positions that are being hired. So that's someone who will be full-time on the project. For somebody like a consultant that's getting less than $5,000 or your volunteers, you do not need to post a description for either of those cases.
And you said there were instructions for that?
Yeah, if you look in the resumes and or job descriptions instructions in the handbook, that's where you'll find.
Okay. Thank you.
The next question is, the librarian that submitted the original application has taken medical leave. Is it possible to change the email of the original submitter? I'm glad this question was asked because we get a lot of emails, and we have also been sending out requests for anybody to update any information for people who have moved on and removed themselves from the original proposal. And we have that happen all the time. People switch jobs, people leave for a variety of reasons. So the key is to first letting us know as soon as possible so that we could go in and we can change the owner of the applications for you in SML Apply. Then we'll send an email to that person. That person will receive the email from SML Apply. And sometimes what happens, well, far too frequently, is that goes to junk mail. So we'll remind you to look in your spam and your junk mail to make sure that invite that comes directly from SML Apply is not in your junk mail. Once you have accepted that and you become the owner of that application, then we can always change who the owner is and give them different permissions for view and editing and submission and those type of things. So yes, you can. And all you have to do is, once again, email us at hiddencollections@clear.org, and we'll go ahead and change that for you. I hope that answered the question.
All right. In describing types of materials, can we list all the types of materials in one cell, or should we have a different form for each type of material? Materials include journals, posters, programs, photos, and newspaper clippings.
I would, let's say it depends. We do have organizations that take everything and sort of submit their project as a mixed materials archive and maybe estimate the linear feet of that, or pages, maybe if it's all paper-based. And so we do see projects submitted like that. And then we also see projects that separate them out. In thinking through your decision, let's reveal, or not, it's not like it's a secret, but we are going to do in the reporting side. So if you're recommended for funding, you receive funds for your project, you're going to be reporting on however you've told us your project, like whatever materials your project has. So if it's going to be easier for you to keep track of mixed archives sort of as a mixed archive, then we would probably recommend that you submit your application in that way. But if you think that you're really going to want to have the data on how many journals, posters, programs, photos, and newspaper clippings that you've processed, we would probably recommend going ahead and splitting it up. It's probably going to affect your digitization plan. Photos are maybe not going to have the same digital file outputs as a journal article or something like that. So you might want to set up in your reporting a little bit differently. So it's kind of a non-answer, but hopefully that background on why we're asking the question can help you as you decide how you're going to present your materials. Okay, next up we have the project outcomes section asks, describe any strategies, events, or other activities you're planning to raise awareness of the digital collections. Are these activities that may take place after the grant period ends? And since grant funds don't cover outreach activities, I assume it's okay that these activities will occur after the clock has run out. First of all, there's nothing in our guidelines that prevent you from asking for award funds to help cover outreach activities. We would recommend that you do sort of keep them to a minimum so that your primary expense is really the digitization work. But we've funded small symposia through this. We've done like student essay contests, poster presentations. So there's that part. If you are planning to use award funds for specific outreach activities like that, they need to occur within the timeline of your project. You cannot expend award funds after your project end date. That being said, if you would also like to reflect on additional future outreach activities that you have in mind, our reviewers love to see that too. Sort of that long-term plan for how you might use these new digital images or files in the community, and really connecting those activities with specific audiences as you think about it. So, you know, are you planning something for K-12? Are you looking for community outreach in specific neighborhoods? Are you thinking about doing language programs with specific groups? Just don't just say we're going to have a symposium with no sort of additional explanation of who you're hoping to reach besides people who might already be within your close inner network of people.
Yeah, so I hope that's good news that you can include some outreach costs. And I think our panel loves to hear about, you know, both cases, things that are happening during the grant period and after.
Great, yeah. And I'll add to that and say it just depends on what you're proposing and what your outreach looks like, because some people, their outreach occurs during the process too. So it doesn't have to be before or after, it could be during. But the next question is, how will grant funds be dispersed, and will organizations front the costs upfront and be reimbursed, or will the grant be dispersed at the start of the project? And the grant funds will be dispersed all at once at the beginning of your project to cover the cost of the project. And then, so there will be no upfront and reimbursement. The money will go to that. And for collaborating organizations, the initial applicant, the lead applicant, the disbursement will go directly to the lead applicant's organization. And then once again, as always, you will choose your start dates. So depending on your start date is when your disbursement will occur. Do you have any more questions?
Yeah, what qualifies as a major activity that should be listed in the work plan? It is helpful to see the various types of activities that should be considered in the work plan. However, we're unclear about how to distinguish major activities from more minor ones. Could you provide an example of a major project activity and an example of something more minor which wouldn't rise to the importance of being listed in the work plan? We're going to take a sec to think about this.
Yeah, I'm trying to think through some of the projects that we've funded and the types of things that the reviewers like to know about and the ones that are really not quite as necessary. So things that come to mind are if you're having to ship materials somewhere, that's kind of a major activity. So you want to like just have a block for shipping, and you might even include like packaging and shipping and having it be sort of one activity over a course of time. You want to plan for your digitization work, but you don't necessarily need to talk about like student assistant A will take like cart of materials 1 to desk 2. Like you can sort of be a little bit bigger in thinking about it. But the first time that you sort of talk about your activities, you're going to want to talk about, you know, this is the scanner that we're going to be using, or this is the camera that we intend to use, or, you know, whatever equipment. You want to make sure you at least mention it once and talk a little bit through the process, but then it's okay to have like chunks of time. You don't have to have all of your the minutia of the project figured out, I don't think. I think back to a processing project I did many years ago, and I knew that we would have to move files from one space to another. So I accounted for that in my work plan, but I didn't necessarily know how we were going to process them. So I didn't know like we were going to take time to like tape boxes on it, like tape on a table to divide papers, to re-sort all of the things. Like that's not the level of detail I don't think that our review panel will look for.
Yeah, I think also if you think about it, I mean, we write grant proposals a lot too, and we go back to our timelines all the time as we're actually starting to, you know, implement a project. So thinking about what are the major milestones or major, you know, activities that you're going to need to keep in mind as you get going. I think that might be another helpful guideline.
Yeah, like this webinar is a milestone in our grant. There's an example. Although this one might be extra, I don't know.
But we're happy to hear that you're thinking about these things in great detail, because that makes for successful applications and competitive ones. Also thinking about right now to really think about your shipping times and how that's been affected because of what's happening right now with the long-lasting effects of the pandemic. And vendor times, if you're using an outside vendor. So think about, I have to ship it to the vendor needs X amount of time to work on this project and X amount, and then shifting the rest of your work plan also around those possible delays that may happen. So we're glad that you're thinking about these things.
We have about 15 minutes left if anyone else has questions.
Okay, we had another one come into chat, still on our work plan. And we sort of anticipated questions about this. Ordering of the activities. The template for the work plan suggests using columns to specify timing and activity description, among other aspects. For ease of reading and interpretation, do you suggest that activities should be ordered by the timing? So maybe splitting up by quarters or by the type of activity? It is up to you. The template that we provide is an optional one for you to use. So as you think through what makes the most sense to you, and maybe, and keeping in mind what Becca just said, that this is really meant to be a tool for you. Yes, it does inform our reviewers as they look at your project and evaluate whether your scope is within reason to the time that you've suggested. But if you're recommended for funding, our hope for you and this document is really that it's a useful tool for you and your team as you approach your project. So if it makes sense to you to group things by time, and so you can see sort of over the course of your entire timeline, the various components that will happen through it, or if it makes more sense to you to group things by the type of activity. We've seen in the past both ways for this program. Like we mentioned before, the way that this work plan is structured is combining sort of a project plan, your digitization technical plan, and then your long-term digital preservation plan. And so if you think about how you're combining those three things together into this one document, it's going to look different depending on how you function, how you might be interacting with external partners, how you might be interacting with vendors and consultants, so that you have flexibility. The goal is maybe after you've done a first draft is to share it with some other people who are maybe a step or two removed from your project to see if it still makes sense, because your reviewers are not going to have the intimate knowledge with your project. And so you want to make sure that you're not leaving out things that are critical to understanding how your project is going to work.
Can I just ask a general follow-up? So if you choose not to use the work plan template, we just want to make sure when the reviewer sees it, they can understand what is going to happen. Okay.
Yep.
And
And
like a rational way, like a common sense way. Yeah.
Yep. And just make sure that you're meeting that page limit requirement, because you don't want, like, say, the last quarter of your project to be on the 9th page, and that's going to be the page that we have to take off. And so then your reviewers are like, what happened? How'd the project end? Yeah, the fact that we have a template for this is the first time that we're trying this. So this is going to be new for our reviewers to see as well.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I think one overall theme that continues to come throughout the application process that we use is that tell your story. So make sure when you're doing this that it does tell the story of your work plan, right? But adhere to those page limits, please, so they can hear the entire story.
Okay, I'll read out this next one. Are you interested in knowing the positionality of those involved in the project? So in the project capacity section, we ask how the proposed project will equitably support and empower individuals and groups that are underrepresented among cultural heritage practitioners. And then we sort of list some of who those groups might be. Yeah, I think that's really important, talking about positionality is like, you know, the social dynamics or the power, right? So I think being candid about that's really appreciated in these applications, and especially, you know, being sure that for those of you who are from those communities, you know, say some of, you know, what what this funding would do to help with, some of the inequities that you experience. And if you are working, based at a large organization, I would say if you're working with partners, then definitely forefront, their thoughts and opinions in this section. Maybe hearing about the project from that point of view is really important.
Yeah, so when we, with this new iteration, we didn't want to just, for it to just be subject specific, but we wanted to also amplify unheard voices. And when we're doing that, we want to make sure that the applicants are thinking about those people, positioning them. And when you're talking about these subjects, or you're highlighting these hidden subjects or unheard voices, that you're putting them in a position of empowerment too, so that everybody is having authentic partnerships with organizations and people in BIPOC communities.
Do you mind if I just follow that up with just a clarification? I guess the reason I'm curious about that question is because I'm wondering if you're looking for that kind of positionality statement from the people involved in the project, like who are part of our institution, because I worry that maybe people might not feel comfortable doing that. Like, maybe you don't want to call yourself out as a BIPOC person or, LGBTQ. So like, I can kind of understand why you're asking the question, or interested in knowing that, but I also don't want to put people in this uncomfortable position of feeling like they have to offer that information if they don't feel comfortable.
I think it's okay to think generally. I don't know that we're asking you to specifically say, like Joy Banks, a white female who identifies she, her, like that is not the intention of this question. But it is about making sure that the reviewers see how you're establishing these authentic partnerships that support the thematic focus of the program, as well as sort of embody the broad representation that the program values. And that doesn't mean calling out individuals, but you should be able to show a genuine involvement that supports the work.
From the perspective of your team or your organization, that's completely fine too. Yeah.
I think too, just based on, and this is a very different way that we're asking this question for the new program as well, but just a caution that our reviewers in the past, they don't want to see just like a generic diversity statement from your organization. Like that is not what they're looking for. They're really looking for how the people involved in this specific project with these specific materials, how that labor force and community that's going to surround it embody these.
Yeah, meaningful engagement. It's a key word there.
And the next question is, are there common mistakes in applications in terms of technical components?
Could be a
What do you mean?
bloopers list is what I was thinking. That just
that's a great
from yeah.
Yeah, so what do you mean by technical component?
I guess things that get in the way of reviewers being able to see what people are really up to. So it's not about the project, but okay, you're laughing already. Not about the project, but more about something you just didn't pay attention to that is commonly not paid attention to.
Well, I think we hit one, and that was page limits. because that happens.
Already
far more
worrying about that one. Yeah.
Yeah, that happens far more frequently. So we have to get rid of those extra pages, and then they don't hear your entire story. So that's the first one. And I think we've hit a couple of these, just the conversation we just had on this last conversation, that making sure that you're trained meaningful engagement in your authentic partnership, and to tell the story is new this time. Like, I think that's such a great word, to make sure that you engage the reviewers and they want to get excited about your project. You want them to say, wow, this is wonderful. This does need to be shown, and this is why. And you tell them, explain why and its importance and its significance in a meaningful, authentic way that empowers the people that you're speaking about. So I think that's one I think I would definitely encourage you to really take advantage of that part of it.
I had one maybe just follow up to that on the page limit thing, the letters of support and letters of commitment. There's a guide for that, for the length, but if folks don't adhere to that, I'm reluctant to cut off their letters. I mean, we've obviously met and explained to folks who maybe don't write these letters more often. So is that oh, there's no other way to say it. I'm a hockey player. Is that a penalty?
Yeah, I'm going back in and checking the letters of a commitment. So those are the ones from your organization, are limited to 2 pages. And I think generally speaking, you should be able, since those are internal letters, you're speaking to administrators within your organization, keep them to 2 pages. But the external letters of support, we do not have page limits on those. So those are the ones that are really, I mean, yeah, they might get really excited about your project. And we do see letters that are maybe 3 pages long. In your conversations, you might just want to remind the letter writers that you're entering a competitive grant proposal process, and our reviewers will be reading a number of proposals. And so every page that they add to your grant application is an extra page that the reviewers have to write or read. So that might help keep folks more concise, but it's only the internal letters of commitment that have that 2-page limit. And we have not found many organizational leaders who have more than 2 pages to write about a grant project. So
I'm trying to think of other bloopers.
Disallowed costs. Please look at the disallowed costs on your budget list and making sure that you're not sticking those in.
yeah. Yeah, I think for me, the hurdle, road bump that I see is, I sort of mentioned it with that, I don't know what I was just talking about, which part, the work plan, I don't know. Anyways, one of the things that I noticed is folks that don't actually use, that's what it was, when you're using just generic organizational language for things, it comes up in like if you're talking about your diversity statement, it can come up when you're in your rights, ethics, and reuse statement, and people will just kind of throw in this standard language. And our reviewers are really looking for you to speak specifically to the materials that you're nominating, the project that you have, and be much more specific than generic organizational language. That's something that we see kind of frequently.
Jillian asked, can we include hyperlinks, for example, to our mission statement or a policy statement so we don't have to use valuable space explaining those things in detail, or do reviewers not read through to those links?
Yeah, Kim Gallen mentioned this at last at the last session, it was great to get her perspective on it because she was a reviewer for a few years. She said that she does read the extra materials that's linked out. And, in some cases, a few well-placed links can really make a big impact because you can go to a website and see, how your digital collections portal looks in real time or whatever the case may be. I'll note that HTML does not work in our system, so you'll want to insert the entire hyperlink, and you can use a shortener like bit.ly to keep those concise, so you're not using more characters than you need to. But yeah,
they count as a word. So we have word
Yeah,
count
they
limit.
count as one
So
word.
one link equals one word. We've tested it now.
Yeah, but
And
that's
that's great because that also gives them more, because some of our reviewers do a lot of research. So the best you can tell your story from your version, that's the accurate version that they can verify, the better for you.
Okay, so I think we'll take this one last question because we know that we're a little bit over 3 o'clock or whatever hour you're in today. And so Helen asked, our organization is currently working on protocol of policy procedure documents. These will not be finalized by November 20th. Can we include draft versions of these documents? And I would say, yeah, if you want to link out, it might be worthwhile to, I certainly will inform the reviewers to know that you're working on it. It will help them understand where you are in the process. And if it comes time, if you finalize them sort of by the end of December, and want to pass those along and you've already included them, we can usually accommodate those sorts of requests. But yeah. So I think that is it from us. We want to remind you again about filling out our survey. And now that you've reached the end of the series, you can give us all of the feedback that you've been thinking about over the course of the whole series of webinars. We've really appreciated all of the comments and suggestions that you've provided so far. And we will definitely be taking those into account as we think about the future of this program. So please, we really appreciated your honesty in there. Just one last reminder that final applications are due into the system by November 19th. So it's less than a month away now. At this point, you all have been working so hard on all this, and we know that this is going to be the most competitive application cycle our reviewers have ever had to deal with, and we just hope that they want to fund all of you at the end of this. If you have any questions for us, we are always available by email at hiddencollections@clear.org. Please let us know if you encounter any problems at all with the system, have questions, big or small. We are more than happy to answer them. So I hope you have a great rest of your day and happy grant writing.
And thank you so much, Steve.